I have this curious question that sits in the back of my head. Um, a elite, if we go back to athletes, right? Where we're athletic folks, we like to think about elite athletes or elite performers. How often has a rigid approach to one's goals actually capped one's potential?
Yeah.
Because I gotta say, every now and then I'm curious. I'm like, yeah, you got there, but I think you had more in the tank, but you were rigid.
All right, welcome to the Path Distilled. I'm your host, Kevin Harris. My co-host is Lauren Tashman,
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Path Distilled.
and we have a special episode for you today. We're going to have a conversation instead of a single guest, and today we have two guests. Our first guest is Dr. Adam Naylor. He's a lead consultant for Telos Sports Psychology and a principal at Primary Leadership Development. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
And our second guest today is Olympic Gold Medalist, and you've heard him talk before on our previous episode. I encourage you to check that one out. And he's Joe Jacoby. He's a performance coach. And thanks again for joining us.
It's an honor to be here today. Thank you so much for having me back.
Of course. And so this is going to be a conversation with a theme of goal setting. And so there's some debate on in the academic literature and as well as the general population conversation on the importance of goals and how to get them set up for yourselves. And so we'll start with our expert, Lauren Tashman, and she's going to be one of the guides, and I'll be asking dumb questions throughout. So
There are no such thing as dumb questions when it comes to goals. Well, I'm excited to chat with you all today. I know we've been talking about this for a while, and I know that we've had conversations together before about goals and maybe what I would view as, from myself, my kind of radical viewpoint, it seems like, at times, on goals. So thought to get us started, since we have this theme on the podcast of really trying to bring stories to people's ears, that maybe you could both get us started with a story that comes to mind about goals.
Sure, you or me, Joe. Where are we going?
You go first, my friend.
Oh man, and as Lauren says, her radical approach to goals. I start to worry because when you say goals, I start to feel like Allen Iverson saying, "We talking about practice?" It's like, for God's sakes, are we talking about goals? Like, are they actually that important? So for me, I feel like I'm a Philly guy, so I missed that. I appreciated that. So I feel like we might head that way. I guess I have so many stories, right? So trained in sport and performance psychology, you talk goal settings like day one, it's like set goals or else. It's like your mother telling you to clean your room. And I think you have to evolve and learn about it as you grow through your career. And again, I think I could have many stories, but I think one stands out to me, which maybe seeds this conversation. And it might have been, God, it might have been a decade ago now. And as my career's evolved, as we spoke before the episode started, I'm pretty good at raising my hand saying yes to stuff. People will see me speak in a sport context or use me and go, oh, I could use you for my business. Or I could use you for X, Y, and Z. And I was invited into a VA clinic, a Veterans Affairs clinic here in the Northeast. I live up in the Boston area. And I'm trying to recall how the leader of the clinic found me. I think it was through some soccer talk I'd done, way back when, or football for those of you in Joe's part of the woods. And she said, we've been asked to set goals and keep closer track of goals in the VA clinic. Can you come in and talk to us about this? And I didn't know what I was going to step in. I really didn't. And it was me in a room of doctors. So I try and be quite humble. I might have got my doctorate in sports psychology, but these are medical doctors. They know stuff. They must know something about goals. And they spoke to how goal setting was being employed in this setting. They said, it doesn't really feel like we're doing it right. I'm like, okay. And we had a conversation. We'll probably get into elements that I probably mentioned that conversation. But we got to the end of it and they said, it feels like goals are so powerful. And we're using goals just to keep people accountable, which seems like we're not getting the meatiness out of them. It seems like we're wasting our time on them. And I know part of that conversation I had with them was, I always go back so often to Damon Burton's chapter way back when in Advanced in Sports Psychology called The Jekyll and Hyde Nature of Goal Setting. which says goals can be totally useful and just totally a waste of time depending on how they're done. And they were speaking to me going, I think we want to get behind this, but the way we're being asked to do it, we're not getting much juice for the squeeze. And we've got to figure out how to do that. And to me, that is really my take on goal setting, how we view them. I think we don't get a lot of juice from the squeeze for how it's almost been, goal setting's been either bastardized or made incredibly rigid by kind of, what would I say? I might get in trouble for this. MBA programs. Set your SMART goals, make it rigid, make people accountable, and you're not getting the meatiness out of it. That psychosocial, emotional piece, and we saw that. It was incredible awareness on their part because God, they could have gone years just playing the goal game and felt dissatisfied and found no benefit. So I guess that's my starting story. I think that's more common than we even realize out there, but people usually can't put their finger on it as well as this audience did.
It'll be interesting to come back to that because I've heard a lot of people now talking about accountability, as we've moved, because of the pandemic to this work from home world, a lot of people like accountability. And so I think what you're talking about there is going to really be popping up soon for people about our goals being kind of done in the right way.
Sure.
Before we get into that, Joe, what's your story?
Well, my, I guess, apprehension about goal setting really comes back. I remember going to my first workout on the Potomac River when I was 13 years old. And I think I've told the story on this podcast before that I wasn't just going to a workout. Like, I was going to a workout at one of the highest performing training environments in the history of whitewater canoeing. And everyone was a world champion. Everyone was a world medalist. And as I started to paddle with this group a little bit more, there were two world champions in this group, and only one of two things could happen at this workout. Either John Ludbill was going to kick my butt or David Hearn was going to kick my butt, and I just, like, who was I to set goals? Like, what good was it really going to do? Like, I was not even I loved being on the water with them, but I wasn't in the same game as them. And I just, at a young age, I just had to figure out other reasons than just like, oh, I could be really good at this one day. And I think that was actually really helpful. And then the funny thing is that even after I switched to the doubles canoe and I started paddling with Scott, even going into as our sixth year of paddling together, going into the Olympic year, there was a doubles canoe team from France and a doubles canoe team from Czechoslovakia. It was one country at the time that were just dominating the circuit. These two were winning gold and silver medals in every World Cup race. And then once again, it was just like, who were we to be setting these, kind of goals? Like, oh, we're going to win the Olympics, Just didn't. It never felt right. I could just never make peace with that. And it just kind of really pushed us into this, well, we have to do the best we can do. I mean, you have to figure out what the controllable parts are of the equation. And I think to back this out for a moment, as I sit here in this conversation with, Adam, who is an incredible mentor to me in my coaching. And he challenged me when I was training to be a coach at Valor to write some reflection papers where this conversation about goals became very interesting. And at the same time, I was sort of confiding to Adam a little bit about my fit within Valor, because there were these really smart, academically trained people like yourself, Lauren. And then you came into Valor, Lauren, and I actually remember reading in our Slack channel one time about you actually said, like, it was a message along the lines of, I'm not sure about the goal thing, or I need some convincing on this. And I'm just like,
you're probably making it sound nicer than I actually wrote it.
No, but this is sort of my point. Even in sort of finding my own fit as a coach in this way, and the way I kind of worked with Adam, it was like I knew you were someone I was going to have like a really interesting conversation with, and someone that I would really enjoy speaking with. And like, even those stories that I told you, like, that's my background. It started off with is, who was I to set goals? And I think it's evolved into something much more than that for me that we can kind of dig into in this conversation.
Yeah, it's funny. You're both bringing up a lot of good things we could dig into. For me, I think when I started thinking about this was when I was in grad school, and it just never made sense to me how in sports psych we focused on goals. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. So like, how am I don't even know. I can't. I was an equestrian show jumper, and now I'm having to work with diving and soccer and softball. I don't know anything about those sports in the sense of what their goals should be and all that. To me, it was always more about my job is to help people leverage mindset, right? And then so the question about goals is, well, how do we help people do that, and what role do goals play in that process? And like me thinking that and then reading this stuff, about smart goals and performance process outcome, I was just like, I just don't get it. Because I would go into work with, teams and athletes, and I'd ask about their goals. And of course, what are they going to say? We want to win. I mean, we want to get to the championship. Like, what else would they say? And of course, you learn, the nuances of how to ask the question better. But that's when I really stumbled on this kind of interesting what I feel like was like radical viewpoint at the time on goals, because it just the whole smart and those things just never resonated with me, and could never understand how it fit into what my role was supposed to be.
I'd have to say, from my perspective, it's almost as mind-boggling not to have now. In the way you've described it, those macro goals do seem too generic to be useful, but I can't process the idea of having, if you don't want to use the term goals, performance metrics or goalposts that you're trying to get to without specifying the steps along the way. So maybe for the listener, as we move along, unpacking those subtleties might be helpful, because if you're, I guess the process goals, the outcome goals, and all those things are academic considerations, but in the layperson's terms, if I'm needing to swim a certain distance or bike a certain distance or shoot a certain number of shots, would those qualify as at least micro level goals? And it could be to anyone on the panel, but um, like, how would one gauge success and or progress without at least those micro level goals?
Yeah, I don't mind jumping in for a sec and pulling back. I think it might add to a little bit of what Joe said, because I do remember those journals and reflections Joe shared with me. And I remember looking at him and saying, no, no, Joe, you had goals. They just weren't the crap we usually put out there. Yeah, I hope I can use that word on this podcast, right? Because I think that's the challenge, right? This word goal has been so hijacked that I think we've lost its purpose or its meaning sometimes. And this is an indirect answer to your question, Kevin. Because I think sometimes we go, what are the stuff I want to accomplish? And to me, it can be rigid. To me, it can be, and I think Lauren alluded to it, well, duh, right? I remember a great article by Gloria Balague, I think it was in the late 90s. She talked about Olympians and goal setting. And she said, the goals of sport are obvious. You're supposed to win stuff. So why the heck are we walking around setting like we know that? And I always say those outcome goals I also call the Captain Obvious goals. Like I've teased many an athlete, go, thanks a lot, Captain Obvious. Tell me a little bit more what you're talking about, Kevin, is how will we get there? Right. But I think that takes a lot of effort to learn how to talk about the hows and think about the hows. And what I think, and I'll pivot to the panel in a second. I don't want to steal all the airtime. I always pull back. I would argue I quite often do goal setting with people, but it never looks like goal setting. I can't recall last time I gave someone a goal setting worksheet. Now, I feel like in grad school, you got to give someone a goal setting worksheet. And if I were to, I'd say you're supposed to stink at it the first time. You're supposed to be okay at it the second time. You're supposed to get it by the end of the year. To me, learning how to goal set is probably a year-long process from what you're talking about, Kevin, because it actually is a skill. And to me, I always get back to the basic essence of the skill. When I think from a mental, emotional performance standpoint, the purpose of goals at their best are to improve the quality of our focus and allow us to feel the way we want to feel. So I often pull back and I won't even use the word goals, because I think the G word gets people to go towards their schema. They go, hey, what's something you hope to do well in the upcoming competition? And then I'll put it on a couple rubrics. I'll say there's three things when you state that I hope it does. I hope it's reasonably specific, right? Because it's a lot easier to aim towards something that's not vague. I hope it's phrased positively. And I'm going to like the basics of sports psych, right? Anyone that's heard phrased positively. Why? Because we are people as humans, we like images and emotion, right? So if it's phrased negatively, that's the image we have in our head. So did you make the effort to go, I would like to, if you're a golfer, put it on the green. At least I see green and have a fighting chance. And then, right, we always hear control what you can control, but I don't think we realize why that's important. Is it reasonably within your control? And that's not to turn us into control freaks, because I think that's the problem with that line in this day and age. People become control freaks.
Yep.
We want to focus on things we can control so we have our stress gets to the right spot. Right? So I say, are we focusing on things that allow us to be energized, filling our mind's eye with something we enjoy and is useful, kind of Joe's story, right? I know Joe. Joe focuses on getting down the river well. Like his mind is filled with the feel of the river. And I can't even do it justice, Joe. But when you talk about kayaking, it's like, I get it, right? I get this feel. It's not about the finish line. It's about this feel and how you're communicating with the other person in the boat. And then that idea of, is it within my control? It allows me to strive towards it. So to me, I start there and then grow from there, Kevin. Because I think so often it's like we start doing the checklist and A, it bores the hell out of people, and B, it didn't engage emotions or focus. So I think it's useful, but I think it's a skill to be developed. And maybe this is where Lauren's going. It's been hijacked too much by society sometimes for lesser ends that don't serve our purposes as well as they could. Whew. Wow, there we go. There's my soliloquy on where to start.
I think one of my questions, I suppose, for the three of you, again, I'm just going to put you guys in the category of having been, really well studied in the area of sports psychology. I just sort of share these stories and experiences. I don't have the academic context, but so here's my question for you, and I don't think it's talked about enough. There's the goals, and then my observation, there's with top performers in canoeing, there's the letting go of the goals. Mm-hmm. I guess my point is, I am sitting at my table here in La Salle d'Urgell, literally looking at the Olympic start line of the 1992 canoeing course. I can see it right out my window. And my point is that I call this the problem with goals, is that whether it's a color of a medal, whether it's a certain amount of money, whether it's the house on top of the mountain or on the beach, this energy that goes into the things that we don't have is energy that is not going into what we can control today. And how can we put the most amount of attention, presence, focus, and energy into what we have today? I don't know how else to do it without letting go of the goal. But I mean, where does that come into the conversation?
I love it, because I think you're both kind of speaking about similar things, right? To me, that's the most powerful thing about why we get this wrong. And it was a few years ago that I stumbled upon this article, and I'm not sure if it's been published. I just found it on the internet. Obviously, the intent was to be published somewhere, called "Goals Gone Wild." It's just like, yeah, exactly. We have this like need for simple and repeatable, and so we just put out this stuff and then everybody wants to grab it and use it. To me, the most interesting thing about goals is the individual difference part and the situational, and contextual intelligence part. Like, what am I trying to do? It's funny because I think it was 2 years ago I was asked by ASP, the Association of Applied Sports Psychology, to put together this little video on goals. I was like, oh no, are you know who you're asking? You want to put together a video on goals for the new year? I don't know that you're asking the right person. But I use this GPS analogy of, trying to get around New York City. If I have a particular destination I'm trying to get to, then sure, I should probably have a plan of how to get there. If I have a particular time that I want to get there, and, this kind of more finite thing, right? And I should probably plan for contingencies, because getting around the city isn't always as easy. Subways, different things, right? But what if that's not the goal? What if I'm, maybe trying to go eat somewhere and I don't want to pick a particular place? I just want to walk around and see where it takes me. And that's actually the goal, right? And so I think that gets to a little bit to your point, Joe, is like to me, the most interesting thing that we have to figure out first is like, what am I actually trying to do here? And then from there, start to craft in the consideration of the person, the situation, the focus, all those things about, well, okay, then how should this be set up?
I'm going to throw a thought out here, and I want to pivot back to Kevin from what you both said. And I guess maybe this ends up somewhere. I always think about when we use words, what images are put in everyone's head, right? So I think that's part of the reason I just getting rid of goals, because in some ways, this is what I think I just heard from all three of you. I think, one, it makes sense to have a reasonable plan, and a reasonable plan might be no plan for some things.
Mm-hmm.
And for learning, there might be a reasonable plan, right? So Kevin, we're talking about what would I like to learn over time. So there's a reasonable plan. But we set a reasonable plan. I like that word reasonable because I think so often we talk about all these things, even all the things in sports psychology, do your self-talk, do your MG, it becomes rigid. And I don't know about any of you, but rigidity actually doesn't perform well. Rigid is robotic, and I don't want my robot, kayaking down a river. Not going to work. I'll take Joe Jacoby over a robot any day in a boat. No doubt. But then, so after we have a reasonable plan, we need to get present. And that's the dance, right? And that's what Joe's really saying is, for God's sakes, are we getting stuck outside at the finish line around the medal? Or are we letting ourselves to get present and emotionally present and be present? But the challenge is that feels so darn intangible. I think as humans, we want our certainty. Well, what is be present? Tell me how to be present. It's like, no, it's freaking be present. And I think Joe's so good at he's better articulating than me. He did a lovely job there. So I'd maybe say we're talking about reasonable plans, and for God's sakes, get present, whatever that means.
And the present piece is hard, right? Like I think it was Brad Stolberg and Steve Magnus that wrote about this on their growth equation. That we, because we're goal directed as humans, we're always, as we're pursuing a goal, we're always trying to figure out, like, am I engaged with the goal? Am I disengaged with the goal? How am I doing relative to the goal? So it just tries to steal our attention, right? And the more important something is, or uncertain it is, then we're trying to think about, like, well, where are we to that? But that's the challenge. I don't know about both of you, but I've worked with so many perfectionists that goals are like the devil for them because there's just this hard and fast line and image, to your point, Adam, like, this is how something has to be. This is how this has to be. And then when it's not like that, what happens? They struggle.
I just have to add, I'm kind of catching up from conversations that have been had in the past, but it's starting to piece together now. I think for me, because I've been so entrenched working in Erickson's lab with already being at the place that Adam is talking about trying to start with, what are the incremental steps, and he using the language of a plan versus a goal might be helpful for the listener to make that distinction, because I've never started a goal necessarily with, well, I'm not envisioning someone starting with Olympic medal being the goal. I'm envisioning someone walking up to the kayak for the first time and saying, okay, I'm in the kayak, I'm in the water, now what? And so that's kind of the approach or the starting point I'm coming from, particularly with the path that one would take from the beginning. So it sounds like a lot of the conversation is related to performance coaching and the high level performers already. And so if you could go back, for example, Joe, to your first time in a kayak or whatever the vessel that I don't know if it's a different vessel and what you did, but what was that early approach like? Can you just remember that or describe it?
I in my own case, I mean, I remember the feelings of the boat really well, and also I would just add, I ran a kayak school for a few years, where it was my job to actually not let people get ahead of the moment of being enjoy, their first time in the boat. Don't think about how good you're going to be in the rivers you're going to run. Just enjoy the freaking craft. It's beautiful. The water feels so good. I actually found it. It was like, again, it was like me almost trying to cut off goals and just trying to get people in the moment, reduce apprehension or fear, of being in this kayak. And I think that feeling of shoving off from the riverbank your first time in a kayak and just feeling you in the water, you're going to feel it one time in your life for the first time, one time. And I know how precious that moment is. And the better job that I do of freeing people from having any expectation of how great they're going to be down line, the more they're going to be in that moment and the more likely that they're going to come back for a second day of kayaking. And when I was in the kayak instruction business, and sorry, I kind of pivoted to being an instructor and running a kayak school, Kevin, but really it is such a hard sport to experience success on the first day, because it is a hard sport to do, that really your only goal of day one is to try to make sure there's a day two. Like, there's not an experience so bad on day one that they don't want to come back for a day two. That was it. It was like that simple. And then you start backtracking from there and you go, oh, okay, I don't really know if that's a goal, but I mean, I guess I'm sure I'm talking about an outcome, but it is really trying to unweight people and get them present and in the moment. And we can talk more about this. There's so many parts of my life that I live like this today. I just don't measure things. I mean, I think most of you guys know I go for a run almost every day of the week. And I haven't taken a measuring device, a phone, a watch, a heart rate monitor on a run in years. And I mean, we haven't had the chance to really qualify for Boston, but I think I'm doing my best running of my life right now, and I measure nothing.
Well, and that's interesting, right? Because Adam, you always talk about kind of like the dance between, right? And that's what I think we're talking about. I don't think any of us are advocating for not setting goals, right? Like, but it's just about knowing which ones to set and when to focus on which ones. And that's one of the things that I think has really been lost from like the original goal theory, like Locke and Latham, talking about the do your best learning goals. There's a time and a place for that. And then there's the time and the place for the performance goals and the measurement and seeing where you're at and the feedback and the progress. And I think a lot of times people have just lost the connection to that of that flexibility, but also that we can have different focuses at different times.
Go ahead, Kevin, please.
I was just going to add two quick points to Joe's point. I think that, and he addressed it for the most part, but making a day two would be the goal of day one. And I was thinking, even from the individual's perspective, that first push off, and that goes later to Lauren's point, but that first push off would initially be the goal for the brand new person, right? So, and I think to Lauren's point, I think this has been helpful coming at it from not having been involved in the conversations, because I was almost in the same position that many of the listeners will be. And it's now clear to me that it's more, it sounds like the conversation is more, which we've already alluded to, the bastardization of the term than it is the goals themselves being bad. Because anyone and maybe even macro and micro goals or plan of action would be useful in the sense that Adam's using. But and this isn't just for theater. This is actually, I was trying to get my head around why this didn't make sense, almost to the level that like saying that I'm not going to have goals, absolutely, I can't wrap my head around having at least the parts that we're calling process or the micro level goals. I think it's the macro level goals that could be problematic, and not deviating from them once they start, it also sounds like it's potentially problematic.
Okay, we got a lot to unpack here. So
I
had Lauren, and then Kevin just threw some great stuff. I'm always on Joe here. So I guess I'm going to throw a couple thoughts. I think off of what Lauren said might relate even to what Kevin just said there a little bit. So I do, Kevin, Lauren, you say we kind of maybe drift away from that original research. Say, I'll give a yes, maybe, right? Because I think there's human nature. Used a word that really caught my attention is we like certainty because it gives us comfort. And I can tell you're going, and all of you know me a little bit, like, yeah, I'm on Twitter and stuff. I'm not super active because I don't like the fluff, but someone baited me into going 5 words on mental performance. And I actually wrote this last year. I'm still happy with it. I've shared it with so many audiences. They're like, oh, I guess that's right. Certainty is uncertain, practice poise. Right? So sometimes we use our goals to give ourselves this certainty and to be able to tell our friends, this is what I'm striving for. And it's just a waste. So I think there's the human nature of certainty feels comfortable. If I can sketch it out, I'll get it. I got this clear path, which I think we have to be careful with. But we also have to talk about this idea of assessment, right? And assessment makes sense, right? Feedback makes sense. I think it's fair to say we're in a moment in time that it's gone overboard. Right? We can measure everything under the sun, right? And this is, I hope people continue to create really cool products that help us thrive. I hope we can better, but like Joe gave the great example there. If I want to measure what I'm doing and compare myself to others all day long, there's an app for that. And someone's telling me that's the way to go about it. Because if you don't go about it that way, you're not using technology right. You're not using technology right, so you're not using the app. And for God's sakes, it's like it makes your head spin. So we've almost gotten this moment of analytics, which to me on some ends, and we have a whole other conversation on, is really cool if done really well. But I think it gets everyone to go down that rabbit hole, right? Joe's a runner, so like how many runners are monitoring every single thing they did? I had a client yesterday that she's wonderful. She got to a wonderful stage of her career. She used to hop on I think it was Peloton, SoulCycle. I'm trying not to promote any one brand, but she was like, I'd get on and I'd have to win. And that made me feel great. I'd have to win. I have to do the right time. And she said, and I think part of it's pandemic stress has her like trying to see the world differently. She said, I'll tell you, Adam, in the last 2 or 3 months, I go for a run and the goal is to run and have a laugh. I hop on my Peloton. I put on the instructor that makes me laugh. And some days I crush it and some days I laugh. And I was like it was like mic drop. Like, we got it now.
Yeah.
Right. We're not becoming victims or robots of our goals that get in our way. She's like, I want to get out every day and have a laugh. To me, that's a goal, but it just doesn't feel like a socially acceptable goal in some ways.
I like that a lot, Adam. And by the way, I sometimes I sort of feel that kind of where I live and sort of the way I've set up my life, it's sort of on the extreme side of a lot of people who are focused on advancement and performance goals and things like that. But I do say that I kind of live my life a little bit like an experiment where I hope to take little pieces out that can help people. So if I run 5, 6, 7 days a week without measuring something, when I transfer this to a corporate client, like we've all had sales and technology leaders who have a dashboard on their computer that's giving them metrics related to goals all the time. And my only question to them is, if you're in the office 5 days a week, you're probably at the computer a little bit more, but your people are selling, or at least your team is selling for you 5 days a week. If you're looking at that dashboard 5 days a week, just tell me, if you took a half day out and you could make that dashboard go away and actually just turn the computer, like, what would you do with that time? What would you do? And they might say, I guess it'd probably make some calls to our good clients, just have long conversations. And I would just be like, well, why can't we do that? Why do we need these metrics to tell us to do that? Why can't we find these points to just turn off those metrics so that we become aware of these things that don't seem very socially acceptable? But if we actually did this all the time, it would move the needle ahead. One more example that I would give, we work with companies that have super ambitious sales goals. Super ambitious. One of the books that we read about in Valor Book Club was Mark Benioff's book, who has an unbelievable goal setting system that starts with Mark at the top, the V2 Mom goal setting system. He sets a huge goal, and it has this unbelievable way of flowing down through the system at Salesforce. And they are big goals. And I've had the opportunity to work with Salesforce clients. And I always say, I have no judgment of the goals at Salesforce, starting with Mark's initial goal. My only objective when I have a client is to help them coexist with the goals that they've chosen to align with, which starts with Mark's goal in that V2 Mom system, which I think is a very clever goal setting system that people should actually check out, just for the way and how quickly it flows down through the system from top to bottom once Mark sets that goal. And I guess that's the thing. If we put ourselves in, Kevin, and this is sort of would be a little bit my I guess my question, or almost challenge to some of the things that you said. What if we found ways to run little experiments that were more like turning the dashboards off, turning off the micro goals, one afternoon a week? Like, what would you do? Like, what's the first thing? If you turned off the GPS, like, what would you do? And then just try it. like it could not hurt. Like I don't believe your brain is going to forget what matters most and what you've agreed to do.
So are we talking physical fitness? Are we talking academia? Are we talking business? What area?
These are experiments that I would love to run. My belief is why couldn't they work for Benny Hoff at the top of Salesforce? Like, if I asked him to turn off his dashboards a half day a week, and he already might be ahead of the game on that, he might be in a position where he could do that. I would also ask, what would that look like in academia? If you were a military leader, what would you do? If you were an elite performing athlete, what would you do? I mean, it's just a question. Like, half a day a week, what would you do?
For sure.
I'm hearing two things, and Joe, I'm going to build off this because he's making me laugh at the dashboard for a variety of reasons. I love it. So one, I know so often when we're people, I always look at them and I can be, I think, kindly sarcastic. I think you got relationship issues. And in this instance, I go, I think you got relationship issues with your goals. And I think a lot of people do, right? They set their goals, they stare at it, it stresses them out all year, and they always hit it. I'm like, for God's sakes, that was a lot of stress for always hitting a goal, right? Like that's a relationship issue to me. So I think Joe's saying one thing, however anyone listening to this podcast chooses to set goals, let's double check how you carry that relationship. Because to me, that feels really important for human being and human thriving. And you got me laughing on the dashboard thing, because part of me thinks as high performers actually, and I'm going to float this idea as an idea out there for everyone, actually kind of shed their goals. And I say this because it was 3 years ago, I had a gentleman that was doing the dashboard thing. It was so funny. And Joe and I, there's a reason I appreciate Joe so much, just beyond just being a wonderful human. I think we share some philosophies. I don't know, maybe we were separated at birth a long time ago or something. But, and I was talking to this client, he said, hey, I got my goals on my screen. And he didn't have to. It wasn't like Salesforce. It was just, I keep it there to make sure my pipeline's good. I said, what if you got that off your home screen? He goes, I think everything would be okay. So he took it off the home screen, took it off, continued to thrive and continued to do good stuff. But it's funny, I just talked to him a week ago. So now I've known him for 3 years. We touched base and he had himself all tangled up because he was like, what's my next role in this company? I'm like, I think you replaced your dashboard for your next role all of a sudden. He started laughing. He's like, God, that has been staring me in the face for months. I'm like, it feels like you put it on your computer screen. He goes, I think I maybe have to shed what's my next role and get back to doing curious creative work. And that's how I love to thrive. And that's how the next role shows up. And it's funny, right? Just, I think maybe we're shedding what's, I don't know, society sounds so grand and dramatic. We're shedding what we think are supposed to be our goals and replacing them with this more curiosity approach, this curious approach, and this, hey, what do I want to attack now? Right? It lacks the rigidity. So relationship issues and shedding goals. So I'm stealing from Joe today.
I think the rigidity certainly is a kind of key theme, right, that keeps coming up as we're talking. But what you were just talking about there, I agree. I think a lot of times goals become the thing that we're just chasing, right? And we're socialized that way, right? Like as soon as you get into school, it's like, okay, well, you got to get this grade and get to the next grade and then the next, and then where are you going to college? And then what are you doing for a living? And you're just, and in sport, it's the same thing, right? Developing, fun, beating this time, all that. So I think we just get into this process of like we don't realize that as humans, we always have stuff that we're looking for in front of us. And that can be just enjoyment, right? I just want to enjoy the day, or it can be something more targeted, right? And something specific we're going after. But when we find ourselves trying to chase that, I think then we get used by our goals, right? And it just has an impact that isn't going to be helpful for us. And Kev, I know you're thinking like deliberate practice unders, right? Like how do we make sure that we're like going after, striving for something?
Well, you can wipe that off the slate, but I do have a question about the if you're targeting I forgot the phrasing you used. It was targeting something you're approaching or chasing. With semantically, how does that differ from a goal, and what is the replacement if you're allowing like, I'm not saying there's a problem necessarily with taking that approach. I just don't understand how it works for the professional athlete that's taking the approach of Joe and just not taking metrics, or the academic, if I don't meet the tenure requirements, I'm not in the job anymore. Or personally, if I want to encourage or develop savings, if I know personally, if I'm not actively doing certain things, nothing will be saved. So I'm just curious as what the actual real world replacement would be for this idea.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but
Please do.
why? I guess my question is, how is it helping you to focus on the tenure thing? Like, I mean, are you? Are you going to forget that? I say that so respectfully, Kevin, but
No, I'm not.
or saving the money. Are you? I mean, are you going to go out and start spending it all? I I'm just, this is my point. I think, where are we willing to actually run like the smallest experiments? Like, I'm not saying start, like, get rid of all your metrics like the way I do with running. And you can be sure the reason I run the way I do today is because there was a time in my life where, oh my gosh, it was the opposite, where I measured everything and I went extreme the other side. And now it's just actually in your question, what is that smallest step that you could take that would, like, let go of that, where you could actually trust that, not thinking about that tenure piece, or not thinking about that savings piece, or that actually might actually help put you in a better position of flow, or in a better position of performance, or that might actually move you forward anyway.
Go
I
ahead,
think,
Lauren.
well, I think
She's
this
about
goes
to say
back
something.
to Adam's point about your relationship with your goals, right? Because that really indicates what impact they're going to have on you, right? Whether it's on your focus, on your stress, and it really goes back to that human nature point. Is it a threat that you're, like, trying to make sure you don't lose, this opportunity, right? Or is it a challenge that you're trying to go after something and approach something? And we know that there are differences in how we show up and how we will perform, and how we will grow and learn, and all these things, depending on that relationship and the impact of the mindset we have about what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it.
So, to yeah, don't know if your experience on the tenure track. Adam, were you on the tenure track at one point?
No, I was not. No, I'm my hands dirty in the applied world. I've watched the tenure track. It sounds lovely though. If someone would give me tenure in any of my jobs, my stress would go down some days. But I'm
Yeah.
told I'm not supposed to stress because I keep collecting jobs.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's potentially more stressful before you get it, because
Mhm.
it's applying for your same job every year. But but that's why I would have a hard time. You have to, and maybe that's just the gist of it. Maybe it's someone, as to borrow your term, has a different relationship with the goals, but it seems impossible to be on a tenure track without having by this point in the year I will have this done, I will have that point. Or even working on a dissertation, if I don't do 12 pages a day of writing, there's no way I'll finish by the deadline. It just are those goals that would also be antithetical to the sorry.
That's all
I've
right.
been
I think I'm
writing
going to
today
try and
too
throw a
long.
thought out here, right? Like, while it sounds so dramatic, I feel like Lauren and Joe have sounded dramatic today. Lauren's radical, and Joe is like living this completely carefree gold life where he has carries no responsibilities and just floats around like some sort of hippie that doesn't care. Neither one of those are true. I don't think Lauren's nearly as radical, and Joe is actually a responsible adult. Let's just be honest here. Let's start there. I think it's just probably the semantics of goals, right? It's that word that gets us in trouble. I will go back to relationship, but to nudge the conversation further, and I'm dreading throwing this word out there. There's another word that can make me batty these days. It's process.
Hmm.
For God's sakes, everyone says focus on the process. But guess what? Whenever anyone focuses on the process, they're actually talking about the outcomes, if you listen to them closely. But I think really what Joe is talking about, what I think I'm talking about, I think Lauren's talking about, I think what you're talking about, Kevin, is actually understanding that the process is a goal, right? So you said something that's near and dear to my heart, right? Like saving. I care. I want to be able to retire. I want to make sure, my daughter is well taken care of, and we live a nice life, right? And I hope this doesn't, and I might over tilt on that sometimes. So I'm like, I actually don't have an exact dollar number in mind, because I don't know what that is. I might ask a financial planner and someone will say it's high, someone will say it's low, but I do know Again, I run my own businesses, so I'm responsible for my retirement. It's like third Thursday every month gets that amount of money. That's a goal, but it's what I do, right? It's a doing. To me, it's noticing the doing, leaning into the doing, and loving the doing, for lack of a better word. And I know that sounds hokey, but it's like on the 10-year process, you can't control what gets published. You can give it a pretty good fighting chance, and maybe you can find a journal that's a little bit weaker. That's like, oh, I can sneak that one in there. But it is about, hey, did I get this number of pages done? And does that suit me? And did I lean in and do those pages with a level of presence, right? Because I think that's the tie too we have to talk to, right? Goals also need to have emotion with them. And I think that's when Joe talks about being present, it's being emotionally there, right? That's a goal. Push off the dock and check things out. To me, that's a goal, but sometimes we forget that that's actually a goal, to allow ourselves to let go and lean in. So yeah, it's a quick thought there. Yeah, I said process.
No, but I think to tie the two, what you're both saying, so you were just talking about the doing, Adam. I think, Joe, what you talk about is like the being. Like, who do you want to be and what do you want it to be like as you're going through this? And I think those are just the things that we forget about when we have these pressures, or when goals turned into pressures and expectations. We lose that focus of like, yeah, but what do I have to do? Like, I remember when I first moved here to just try and be a consultant in New York City like a crazy person, you know, I I obviously had to be very considerate of finances and worried about that, and would shift into the pressure of that. And I remember I was just focusing on the doing. Like, I would have these like $0 weeks, literally. Like, can I just have 4 or 5 days where I'm not spending money? That's my goal right now, to be in a good financial position. I have as many as I can $0 days in a week. That was the goal, right? Because it's something that I can do, rather than focusing on this big thing that turns into what I have to do and this pressure of it, right?
I'm going to throw a wild question out there. Maybe I don't know if I'm supposed to be the questioner. I think that's Lauren and Kevin's job, but I'm going to throw a question out
Please
there.
do.
And to keep this nudging, because I think we've circled around some good stuff. I have this curious question that sits in the back of my head. If we go back to athletes, right? We're athletic folks, we like to think about elite athletes or elite performers. How often has a rigid approach to one's goals actually capped one's potential?
Yeah.
Because I gotta say, every now and then I'm curious. I'm like, yeah, you got there, but I think you had more in the tank, but you were rigid. And you got so married to that, it caught you up and stuff. I'm like, you actually put a ceiling on by the way you carried your goals, rather than in some ways what Joe's saying opened up a world of potential. And again, I know we're talking nuances, right? It's like, in some folks, it's like, yeah, you gritted your way to the gold medal. Maybe you could have gotten the gold medal even more joyously. It's like, for God's sakes, right? We're talking millionaires and billionaires in the sporting world, right? Of how they win. But I get concerned about how we carry goals as a capping of potential sometimes. And that seems ridiculous. It seems unfortunate.
I also think we lose sight of the individual differences, right? Like, I think less people are familiar with the idea of goal styles, and that article that was written several years ago proposing a model about that we have different styles and different orientations, and self-esteem, all these things tie in. So that's what I'm always interested about too, is like, what brand, what version of goals is right for you at what time for what reason, right? And so that's where I think, to me, it ties back to the focus of our podcast, Kevin, and coming from Anders, is like, Anders was focused on deliberate practice and trying to get to excellence, and what do we have to do to try and become expert at something, right? And so, okay, so what do we have to understand about what goals might look like as we're trying to build something, and whether that's something specific and tangible, or something more, some adaptive expertise that might look a little bit different. But Adam, as you were just talking about, once you get to a particular level, it's that old adage, right? What got you here won't get you there. So now what do we focus on?
Might be an odd time to bring this up, but I'm actually on the same page as everyone. It was my hang up. Apparently, I feel very comforted now. But my
I'm happy we comforted Kevin. Was that the goal of philosophy?
That was the goal.
So you need a good hug, Kevin.
Poor Kevin
has
come into a
socially
long
distanced. I would give you a hug,
conversation.
Kevin.
But I think as being in the shoes of the listener, it would have been confusing had we not gotten to at least in my mind, to the point where we called all of those things goals with the acknowledgement or the asterisk that we're treating it differently for the conversation that's been having been had. And so I think now that whatever language we use for those smaller scale steps, I agree that one should not put themselves in a corner by setting too rigid of a goal. I think they should develop the skill that they now know better to assess, individual differences that Lauren is talking about, or this is not working for me. And because I shouldn't bang my head against the wall for 10 additional months because I thought I should do this, I should actually have the skills to step back and say what works better or be in the moment. But that might be, to me, it didn't register in my mind saying that the not spending money this week is not a goal. We can agree that we can use a different word, but originally the listener would have been confused that was what we're saying was the goal setting is not just the gold medal or the ultimate end goal, I think is what needed clarification in my mind to be comfortable.
I think that's, Adam, one of your points you made, right? Is a lot of this is about the language and the mental model that's been built in each of us and across society when we think about this word goal, right, and what it's come to mean.
No, I think that's very fair. It gets used 50 million ways,
To Joe's point, I've almost driven myself crazy with goals that I wish that I would have taken the approach that he's suggesting, just letting more things happen naturally and not feeling like I don't know, going to be in a panic if this doesn't happen this week or the next week even. So I think it's admirable and a good suggestion to take these steps.
Kevin, it's interesting, and I think that you also know from our first conversation, I'm heavily influenced by my surroundings here in the Catalan Pyrenees, and these words simple, slower, and less, that is really a way of life where I live here. And I have this conversation with coaching clients that I always make the acknowledgement that I have no aspirations to manage a team or to grow a company or do any of those things. And I say to these people who have those responsibilities, I am so much less than you on this point. But then I think as we sort of build the trust in this kind of coaching relationship, that I think sometimes I almost feel a little bit like that I represent a little bit of the white space in their life to step back and think about it that way. That it sort of hit me in the last, working with a lot of sales and technology clients since December and January, and just the goals that are around them at these sales and technology companies, really big, ambitious goals, and their coexistence with them, and how to get where they want, and how can we really figure out what those tiny little experiments look like. Again, I'm not trying to get them to live like the way we live here in the Catalan Pyrenees, not a way of life, but what does it look like to reflect, to use that simple, slower, and less way of life we have here as a point of reflection through the problems and the opportunities that you're looking at in your life. And I can also say that even if you have aspirations to perform really well, like at the Olympic level or at a sales and technology level, I do know that even improving technique, practicing deliberately, is not just, learning technique at fast race pace. It is moving a canoe and kayak paddle motion really, really slowly through the water, so that you intuitively understand how a paddle moves through the water. And if you're thinking like gold medal and it's competition, pace and results and mindsets, it's just interrupting the mechanics of how the good stuff really works and feels. So I'm always just trying to sit here with with these clients, represent that white space, a little bit more white space in their life, so that we can break something down and find what the experiment is. Like, well, what does that look like if we sort of let go of that? Like, what would you do? How would you solve it? if you didn't have the normal goal feedback metrics, and that's just always the way I'm thinking about the approach to the people that are thinking about this much, much faster and more aggressively than I tend to think about it.
I think that speaks to something I talk with clients a fair bit about, is this idea of the power of the and, right? Like we can be striving and working towards something, and we can also be thinking about how we want to be throughout that process, and when we're kind of on the right track and when we're on the wrong track. And, it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. And I think that ties back to Adam, something you were saying about this idea of thriving and trying to get to our potential or increase our potential rather than cap it, right? Like goals, I think sometimes can be really stifling and limiting and put you in survival mode rather than, put you in a mode of thriving and unlocking potential. So again, my point is, I don't think any of us are saying don't set goals. It's just be less rigid, be a little bit more open, and to the idea that they can look a lot of different ways, and you can approach them in a lot of different ways.
I think that's a great point, right? Like this is going to sound so sport competitive to me. Like I actually think, perhaps rigid goals can get you to be an expert. I think there's a whole nother level. I'm greedy. I'm greedy, right? You get there, there's another level there. And that does take reflection, going, how do I go about this? And that's like anything in life, right? We get to a spot and we probably want to reflect on, is there another way to do this? And would I like another way to do it? Because you don't have to Joe's point, in some ways, like, hey, if you do you, and there may be some other options if you consider that white space. But I think you can get we've seen it in sports, right? You can grind your way to a certain level. And I can assure you this, from like 25 years of serving athletes I just feel fortunate to being around, there's a point where you can't grind your way to that next level. Mm-hmm. You got to find another approach. And that doesn't mean you're not going to work hard. You're going to work plenty hard. But it's just not going to be the same way that got you to expertise. I think sometimes reflecting and reconsidering our goals actually takes us to the next level, frankly. But that's me just being a greedy, competitive guy, I guess.
I agree 100%. I think that's the nature of it.
Did you just agree that I'm a greedy, competitive guy? God sakes, he barely even knows me.
No, that's that getting to that next level and always having to reassess and go to the next, potentially next thing to try to improve performance. I was agreeing 100% with that particular part.
I know, I'm just, it's just me.
No, but I think it's interesting. I have a couple clients right now I'm working with who are trying to think about, next phases of their career. And we've really gelled, at least from my vantage point, because they're similar to me in that they weren't the draw a line in the sand, this is what I'm going after for my career. They were similar to how I was, where it was just like an opportunity presented itself, thought about whether or not you wanted to go after that opportunity, went after that opportunity, another opportunity, and we've had people like that on the podcast, right, Kev, that they didn't set out necessarily, to end up where they are. They just kept rolling with opportunities and moving forward. But inevitably there comes this point where you gotta think about, okay, so now what? And my question to them is always, do you want to continue along that path? Like, is that what you want or need now? Do you want or need to change? Right? Like there's no formula that we're trying to get to. It's trying to figure out, like, what do you want and need and what's going to help you get there.
To me, that alludes to, or ties back to Joe's point about, I guess both Adam and Joe's point about being in the moment and kind of just taking it more slowly. In a lot of those cases, the folks were just ended up focusing on what they were doing, decided they were just only going to focus on what they were doing. And that's when the opportunities actually started to expand. So I think Joe was alluding to that earlier, in the sense that if you remove all the other baggage and just focus on what it is that you quote love in their cases, then that actually improved performance to the degree that they weren't getting when they were actually maybe setting up some parameters around themselves. So yeah.
Kevin, I would say I think about this sometimes, that that I think to Adam's point, that I don't want it to come across that like there's not a place for goals as much as a place to let go of goals. But I think about the way I've been kind of doing my morning routine now for a lot of years. I've been doing it for a lot of years a certain way. And I think a little bit sometimes about like why I do it, why I get out of bed. And I go through the pretty elaborate routine that takes a while. I mean, I have a certain way that I do things. And of course, it has to be about things about the way I feel and the way I want to feel. Those are sort of the controllable parts. And then there are relationship parts of it too, that there are moments that I want to experience with other people who mean a great deal to me, and kind of putting myself in the best position to do that. But it's almost that it's not like I have to think about that, or I don't have to like pin a picture of that up on the mirror or words, to do it. It is, it's just ultimately there are things about the way I kind of organize my first couple. It ends up being the first couple hours of the day. That's more time than a lot of people have to invest in this kind of thing. Things like meditation and journaling and going for a run and doing some yoga. It's pretty elaborate, but at the end of the day, that the way I do those things, it is. They're not like, it's not exactly like checking boxes either. And when I do go for the run, I'm listening to my body. I'm listening to nature. I know I can just tell just by the way I end up thinking about the times of my day where I want to be in good mindset, good, like this was one of these parts of my day where I wanted to bring my best foot forward. But I knew that there were parts of the day that I had to really come down if I wanted to be up, for this conversation and do that. And I don't know, it just still never feels really like goals to me. I mean, so much of it is so unstructured and just feeling. I guess at the end of the day, the last time I was in the United States, the last time I was in the U.S., I was actually with Adam.
Right.
We were doing a Valor Professional Day in June of 2019, and Adam did a talk around Valor's core competencies. It was called From Awareness to Optimism. And, this made so much sense to me that so much of what we're talking about starts with awareness. Like everyone wants to debate, where does all this start? And it really does start the moment you become aware. And I would only sort of say that somewhere I think as humans, if we can move that moment that we become aware, very aligned with a form of being gentle and kind with ourselves, this process becomes a whole lot more enjoyable and a lot easier to manage.
Well said.
Perfectly said.
So
It's like a mic drop right there.
I know.
I do want to throw one more question out there, and we can edit it out if you don't want to answer it. But what is Joe and Adam? What are your takes on those, particularly for youth athletes, those drill type camps? What do you think about those, and how does it fit into your outlook?
Adam?
Yeah, he leaned to me. I think enthusiasm should lead the way, and that's enthusiasm of the kid, not the parent or the system around it. I think there's no need to ever overdo them. And I think an adult should be careful letting their child overdo them for mental and physical reasons, right? I think when I think developmentally about goals and learning and development, I always feel like, and again, I don't know where it fits in this conversation perfectly, but a childlike approach to performance is gold. And I fear when we start to knock that out of people, because it does happen, right? But we don't want that to happen too quickly, right? I even, with my elite athletes, it's like, play like a child, prepare like a professional. And I fear some of these rigid camps are having someone act like a professional, and who do I get ahead of, and why do I get ahead? Am I good enough? Right? Joe talks about the idea of self-forgiveness, right? It becomes this judgy junk, as opposed to, am I curious, exploring, and playing? And I can assure you, the best athletes I've worked with, that's how they've gotten to where they're at, by being curious, playful, and exploring. Joe's a great example, right? The guy's got a gold medal. He did all right for himself, And I think, to me, when I think about those camps, if it starts to rob someone of that, I get concerned because to me that's not a very good long game. It's as a human, I don't think anyone deserves that.
Mhm.
I'll jump in with a really cool story about this, Kevin. I mentioned that when I was really young, that I found myself into this amazing training group on the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. The amazing thing about paddling on the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. was not only was there this amazing training site on this canal, they're called the Feeder Canal, but just below Great Falls, the river is really big, and there's some really, when the water level's right, there are some really big standing waves that are some of the best surfing waves for canoeing and kayaking in the United States. I remember, like, you have to imagine like how cool it was to go to a workout when you're 14 years old, and John Lugbill, the world champion, is there, or Davey Hearn, the world champion, is there, and you show up, and at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and John Lugbill says to you, "What are you doing here?" And like this, like it just, you're 14, like you feel that in your gut when the world champion says that to you. I'm like, well, where should I be? He says, "Why aren't you out surfing on the waves with with everyone else? Like you shouldn't be here doing gates with us, doing drills. You should be out surfing waves." I was like, that was like an oh my God moment. And after that, it was like every time the river level hit, we knew what the exact level was. 4.2 on the Little Falls gauge for Rocky Island, and about 3.5 feet for observation deck. When there was like a phone number you called with this computerized voice in the 1980s. It would actually tell you what the river level was. And yeah, when it hit that level, it was like, we're not going to the gates today. We're going to go surfing and have fun. And that was a part of that culture that I wasn't seeing at 14 years old. I needed the world champion to tell me that. And that was it hurt. Like I was like, if I'm not supposed to be here, where should I be? And why is the world champion having to educate me about this? Like you don't want the best guy in the world to talk to you like that. Like, why did you make the wrong decision? So that's would be my take, and why probably has a huge effect. And I don't think Scott and I could have won the Olympics. Like, at least my contribution to my part to winning a gold medal at the Olympic Games, it could not have happened without like freaking loving surfing waves on the Potomac River.
That to me has always been the missing mark here, is we focus on the goals, we forget the why. Like, what is the point of goals? The point of goals is these bigger picture things. It's about motivation, it's about confidence, it's about emotion, it's about putting ourselves in a position to thrive and grow. It's about focus. Like, that's the point. So it's a tool, not this thing that it's become. I think, at least that's how I see it.
I think that's fair.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm probably going to drop my goal now of being a model, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit. It might happen now that I drop it, but I changed up my Brad Pitt joke, Lauren. You'll be happy.
I was gonna say, what happened in the goal of being Brad Pitt?
Thanks again, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you all. This was a blast. It was good to see all of you.
Thanks
So
so
good.
much
Thank
to
you
the
so
two of
much.
you for another amazing conversation.
The Path Distilled is hosted by Kevin Harris and Lauren Tashman, created and produced by Kevin Harris. The content is copyrighted by The Path Distilled, all rights reserved.